Hello, all, and welcome to History with R&R's presentation of Titanic and Her Sisters.
Yes, welcome all.
So far, we have Bird of Prey 5 in the chat, Kapla, and good morning. So, I think what we'll do is we'll start out with the Olympic, then we'll move on to the famous of the three, the Titanic, famous for all the wrong reasons, and then the Britannic.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
All right.
I guess we mentioned Bird of Prey and he disappeared.
Oh no, Bird of Prey 5 is still there. I think could have happened.
Anyway, yes, the Olympic class cruise ships built to be the biggest ships of the time, the most elegant, the most luxurious, and honestly, what would seem to be the most dangerous.
Yeah, somebody put a black cat on the path, broke 14 mirrors, something, because the history of these three sisters is interesting, to say the least.
And there is one common denominator other than the fact that they were all of the same class, and that is one young lady who spent time on all three.
Yeah, I see her on a boat. I'm no longer on the boat. I'll take the next one. I'm just saying. I see her on the boat. I'm gone.
Yeah.
And welcome, Mountains of Elysium.
I had to get rid of Locutus because he's.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Anyway, I'm trying to.
Kitties, gotta love them.
Yeah. Sorry for the interruption, folks, but I'm trying to find her name because I don't have it. He's just not going to take no for an answer.
Well, they learned to call her the unsinkable woman because she was aboard the Olympic during her when she had a small little argument with a Navy ship, and then she was on the Titanic when it sank, and then she was on the Britannic when it sank, because the first two times wasn't bad enough, apparently.
Violet Constance Jessup.
Yes.
She lived until 1971.
Yes.
And was from Argentina.
And apparently unsinkable.
Unlike
the Titanic. Ooh, too soon?
Oh. Yeah, something like that.
All right, so the Olympic is the only one of the three sisters to actually serve out her career. However, she had her own run-ins with, the bug. For one, the Olympic and the Titanic both, their turbines, like their propellers, were the three shaft, and they were so big that when they were moving at full revolution, they could suck in a ship that was beside them towards that ship, which happened to the Olympic and almost happened to the Titanic.
Yes. The Olympic had a mishap that led to the delay of the Titanic.
Yes. What ended up happening was there was a little argument about who had the right of way between a British Navy vessel and the Olympic. And the Olympic came out on the wrong side of that one.
Yes. But they took parts from the Titanic to fix the Olympic because she was in revenue service and the Titanic wasn't quite yet.
Yes.
And the Olympic went on to a 24-year career, finally being scrapped in 1935, and Um, she ended up being the largest British ship built at that point. Now, the Titanic and the Britannic were bigger. And we'll get to the Britannic and her original name when we get that far.
Yes. And also, another thing with that is the Olympic. Well, she did serve during World War One. There is a famous story, mildly, for the most part, it's considered fact. There are some within the community that go, "Nah, it didn't happen," but it did. For the most part, there's actual written proof that now whether or not the Olympic actually sunk the submarine or not, another story. But the Olympic was about to be torpedoed by a German submarine, and the captain decided, F it, and put full steam ahead, and, well, the submarine had to dive relatively quickly before the Olympic was a can opener and it was a can.
Before it lost an argument with the Olympic.
Yes. Now, unfortunately, in 1934, right a year before she'd retire, the Olympic had one more little curse of the sisters. When she was coming in on a very foggy day into a port in the United States, where she hit a lightship and split it in half, just like a knife through butter. The Olympic wasn't damaged very much. However, only 4 survivors of the lightship were able to survived. Out of 11 crew, only 4 survived, including the captain. It's just one of those things of big ship going too fast, didn't see it too late. Damn.
And you mentioned it. It's the curse of the sisters.
Yes.
When we get to the Titanic, there's a lot involved there.
There is.
But the Olympic, she served out her time. She was decommissioned, or she was scrapped in 1935. She was replaced as the biggest British-built ship on the ocean in 1936 with the Queen Mary.
Yes. One of the ships that would replace her. The other one would be the Queen Elizabeth.
Right.
Also, just very quickly, the Olympic had such a good career, even though she did have a few mishaps. She would be called Old Reliable because of her service. Even with all of her mishaps and oopsies and all of the stigma that was left after the Titanic sank, including a workers' strike.
Yes.
She survived all that. And she kept pressing forward. And she did her owners proud.
And in perspective, 24 years old is not that old for a ship.
No.
At that time it was, because the Olympic had been basically replaced. Not actually replaced, but there were so many advances made between the time she was built in 1909 and the time she retired in 1935 that she was just not able to keep up.
No.
They couldn't.
And it was also a very changing world, too.
Yes.
They didn't have as much sea travel. Sea travel started to go down. They were starting to lose money in 33, 34. And then, of course, there was that little pesky thing called the recession.
Or what most of the world called the Great Depression, yes.
Yes. And welcome, Lord Seth.
Yes. And the whole whole sea ships at that point were getting bigger and bigger anyway. Not only your cruise vessels, your cruise liners, but Navy vessels were getting bigger at the time too.
Oh yes.
One of the things that I had seen is that when they were putting the sisters together, it took roughly 4 minutes for each rivet that built those ships to put them in place. It took 4 people or 5 people and 4 minutes for each of the 3 million rivets that held those ships together.
Yeah. It's a little time consuming. Just a tad.
And, in today's world, that would be outrageous since, that's one of the reasons they went to welded ships.
Yes. Stronger too. Okay, so let's move over to the Titanic, the most famous of the 3.
When we start with the Titanic, let's start with the fact that, again, she was delayed a couple of times because of Olympics problems.
Yes.
Standard shipbuilding at the time included hot steel rivets to put the plating on. However, it also, because of the way that rivets were done, or steel rivets were done, getting 2 people on the inside of the ship to hold a hot rivet in place so a guy on the outside could bang the hell out of it was difficult at best. And so they used cast iron rivets to put the bow plating on. And this was standard procedure at the time. It led to some, they didn't think of it at the time, but it did lead to some small problems with rivet drift.
Yeah.
Because the difference between cast iron and steel is vast when it comes to that kind of thing. The Titanic also had a problem with the fact that coal miners in England or in the United Kingdom were on strike.
Yeah, coal was very hard to get.
So the Titanic ended up collecting coal from ships that didn't have full loads because, well, they sold their tickets to go on the Titanic.
Yeah.
I saw a documentary the other day. The iceberg that won the argument with the Titanic left Greenland roughly in the beginning of March for its journey southbound through the Atlantic Ocean. So the disaster for the Titanic was months in the making.
Oh, yes. Well, yes. Years in the making, actually, but that's besides the point. Colin P. Smith says, hello, welcome. Glad you could make it. So the other thing with the Titanic is you have to remember back in Titanic's era, there was something called the Blue Ribbon. And the Blue Ribbon was very important because, as Richard said, there isn't a lot of coal right now. So ships that can fill them be filled get the coal.
Yep.
The ones that can't don't get the coal.
And
if you don't have the coal, you don't get money. No money means you go tits up.
The Titanic was using all the profits they were making. They were selling, I believe it was £2 sterling to get a steerage ticket on board Titanic. and those were very profitable for the White Star Line. And they were using all that profits to buy every bit of coal they could possibly find.
Yes. So what they wanted was the blue ribbon, because then the rich people will want to be on the Titanic. Because what the blue ribbon was it was a moniker that stated that your ship made it the fastest between England and the United States. It was the fastest crosser. And companies back then battled over the blue ribbon all the time. And ships would get the blue ribbon and lose it. Get it, lose it. Get it, lose it. Because shippers were getting bigger, faster, pushed further. So during this time, getting the blue ribbon was important, because if they didn't get the blue ribbon, they weren't the most prestigious, and they may not get the coal next time. So that will play into what happens out at sea.
Another thing that helped with the Titanic was the reassignment of Captain Smith from the Olympic to the Titanic.
Yes, the Captain Smith was by no means a rookie. He was by no means a bad captain. Captain Smith was the man that fitted out ships. So for the first few years of Olympic's career, Captain Smith was the captain. When the Titanic was ready to set sail, Captain Smith handed over Olympic to her, to what would be her full-time captain, and then took control of the Titanic. He was what they called the fitter-outer. He made sure that the crew was ready to go and the ship was ready to go, and he was the best man for the job that they could trust with their new ship.
Not to mention the fact that many people would, oh, wait a minute, Captain Smith is on this one. Let's go. And they would trade in their tickets to get on a ship that was captained by Captain Smith.
Yes, because he had reputation, he had prestige, he had done the crossing many times. You know, he's not, this isn't his first rodeo.
And there were a lot of people who went on Titanic only because of Captain Smith.
Yes.
Now, one of the most influential people that was supposed to be on the Titanic and didn't make it was the owner of the White Star Line, J.P. Morgan.
Yes. And we'll get to that little tidbit, which would spark another little craw in my feathers, namely the conspiracy theory that surrounds Olympic and Titanic, that is a bunch of hooey. But we'll get to that in a little bit. And welcome, Max World Entertainment. But yes, we'll get to that in a second. So as you were saying, Richard.
So there are a lot of things that were going for the Titanic. Not only was she the biggest, most luxurious, she wasn't the most famous, but she had already had a reputation because, well, she was the Titanic.
Yes.
This was going to be the ship of ships. And they only got bigger from there because the Olympic class, the Titanic was bigger than the Olympic, and when we get to her, the Britannic was even bigger than that.
Yes.
And a lot of it had to do with, the Titanic, but we'll get to that too.
Well, yeah, we'll cover that. Also, the Titanic led to a few little alterations to the Olympic.
Yes. So we're going to be covering that as well.
So the Titanic finally set sail, and now to give you an idea, there are reports now that when she left, for one, she was supposed to go for her trials, sea trials. Well, it was a really stormy day. So the next day they did the sea trials, except, well, they half-assed it. And then the Titanic was sent on her way. Because she had a schedule to keep, damn it.
And there was another thing at play there, because on her way from Belfast to Liverpool, where she was home ported, she had an engine fire.
Yes.
Which weakened the hull plating.
Just a tad.
And I've seen pictures. You can see where the fire damage was.
Yes.
Ironically, and right about the same place that they hit the iceberg.
Yeah, imagine that.
You know where the
So the Titanic loads up and it sets sail. For the most part, it was a very peaceful crossing. However, the problem was is not only did you have the captain, but you had the representatives from the White Star Line that, let's just say, were more worried about the blue ribbon and the reputation of the ship
and the White Star Line.
And the White Star Line. Because let's face it, they put a lot of money in this. The Olympic had already cost them money because the Olympic was down for a while. The Olympic's back by now. As a matter of fact, it was across the ocean when the Titanic set sail. So, as a matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize the Olympic was on the Atlantic when the Titanic went down. And not only that, but the Olympics crew was not told. Neither was the Olympics passengers told that the Titanic had sank until they hit port.
Yep.
The officers knew, White Star knew, but the passengers didn't.
The radio
passengers didn't. It was kept from them until they got
and back a lot of that is the mentality at the time.
Yes.
Okay.
It was all on prestige. It was all on reputation. So where the captain, after hearing that there's icebergs from other ships, wanted to kind of slow it down a little bit. Take it easy. The people from the White Star went, oh, hell's no. You're going as fast as the ship will get us there because we need to be the fastest, the biggest, and the best. And we have to prove it. Or we're going to lose money. And we cannot lose money.
Nope. So they ended up pushing the ship and losing the ship.
Yes.
And the prestige. And the whole shitstorm that started because, you know.
Now, to be fair to Titanic, because Titanic gets a lot of grief. Because, well, how could they not have enough lifeboats for the passengers of the Titanic? What the hell? Here's the problem. Titanic was built in a very interesting time. It really wasn't the Titanic's fault, like the White Star's fault, because they had followed all the regulations put in place. The problem was the time. The regulations that regulated how many lifeboats you had on, whether you had life preservers or you didn't have life preservers, all of that information and all of those regulations had not been updated as ships got bigger. So ships got bigger, but the regulations did not change to fit this. So by regulations, the Titanic had the required amount of life jackets and required amount of lifeboats by law. problem is the law was outdated.
It was only it was also only half of the passenger load of the ship at the time.
Yes, which was again absolutely common practice.
And even the ship's passenger load was less than passenger capacity.
Absolutely.
By about 400 people.
Yeah. Could have been much worse.
Could have been much worse.
Yes.
So
now the other thing that you have to keep in mind is the Titanic was designed to have 5 compartments filled out of her watertight compartments. 5 of them could be filled, and the Titanic should theoretically still float, which is why they christened her the unsinkable ship. Well, unfortunately for them, not only did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but all of them flood, and 3 within the first couple of minutes. It just was too much for Titanic. And they learned a very valuable lesson. Unfortunately, they would repeat it, but that's besides the point. That no ship man-made will ever be unsinkable.
And the other thing at play was that when some of the design changes from the Olympic to the Titanic, the grand staircase that is so famous in pictures, they actually cut down the height of the watertight compartments to make that grand staircase. So they didn't go as high as they had on the Olympic, and that led to even more problems because water was going up over the tops.
Yes.
I believe it's 4-6 feet,
something like that,
sooner than normal,
yeah.
Or sooner than it was supposed to.
Yes, which of course would be fixed in Olympic because they would raise the bulkheads.
Well, the bulkheads were up there.
Yeah, but they raised them again.
Yes,
they raised them even more, and then they half double hulled the Olympic.
Right,
and then the Britannic would have a full double hull.
And we spend a lot of time on the Titanic because that is the most famous ship of the.
Yes, it is the most famous ship of the Three Sisters for all the wrong reasons.
Right.
The Titanic, when it set the other really crying shame of when the Titanic went down was the fact that other sailors believed the hype. Like other captains believed the hype that the Titanic was surely unsinkable. They had done everything they could to make sure she was unsinkable. So when she was launching her emergency flares, some captains legitimately thought it was fireworks.
Yes.
And did not respond.
And then there's the captains who would not take their ships into iceberg-filled waters.
Yes.
The Carpathia, which did rush into danger's way to try and save passengers from the Titanic. She passed 6 icebergs on her way.
Yeah.
And she had to turn around and go back because she was on her way to Austria, Hungary at the time. Now in Croatia is where she was headed.
But the Titanic itself will always be one of those it shouldn't have happened. Because it shouldn't have happened.
No.
Unfortunately, money and people putting fame and fortune and profit above safety and human lives nipped them in the ass this time.
And this is one of the times government regulation fell behind. But then once this happened, regulations kicked into overdrive.
Yes.
Okay. We know that there have been cruise line disasters since. The one that screams to mind is the one off the coast of Italy.
Mm-hmm.
But the loss of life was not as great because of the regulations put in place and kept in place because of the Titanic.
Yes. More lifeboats, etc.
Right.
Now, the Britannic is before we get to the Britannic, there is a small little thing I want to touch on, which is the ludicrous conspiracy theory that if you listen to any tinfoil hat wearing nut job, will tell you that the Olympic is at the bottom of the Atlantic and the Titanic was the ship that actually made it to be scrapped. Because the story goes that when the Olympic struck the Navy ship, it broke her bow, broke her back. Which, if you know anything about Navy ships, there's no coming back from that.
Right.
You're done. So the thought is they would change the Olympic to look like the Titanic, launch the Titanic, sink her on purpose, collect the insurance money, and bingo, presto, changeo, they'd be good to go. The problems with this are vast. One, the ship that is down at the bottom of the Atlantic has the actual Titanic numbers on it. Now, this is what you have to understand. Every single plate, every single piece of furniture, every single thing on the Titanic or the Olympic had a number.
Yep.
And they were different.
And I will tell you that those things exist even in today's Navy. The United States Navy did have a confusion. They started to build a battleship hull and put a flat top on it and called it the Coral Sea. And they started to build a flat top and ended up with a battleship named the Iowa, I believe. That does happen. But with the Titanic and the Olympic, it could not have happened.
One, there wasn't enough time.
Right.
To switch over everything and to make it proper.
Right.
You couldn't do it.
And
yes, visibly from a distance, the Titanic and the Olympic look almost identical. Yeah. As a matter of fact, there were a few very, very, very famous pictures taken of the Titanic that are actually the Olympic.
Yes.
The other thing is it doesn't hold water because, well, like I said, they didn't have enough time to change everything out so that when Robert Ballard would go down and pull stuff off the Titanic, that the numbers would match.
Right.
In order to do that kind of a change out, they don't have that kind of time.
And as Jessup Petrick had mentioned, that was debunked years ago. But
yes.
But unfortunately, with the internet, you say something on the internet and somebody's going to believe it.
Yes, we'll get to that in the Britannic because that one pisses me off, and that's Hollywood's fault. And yes, Bird of Prey 5, it doesn't hold water was pun intended. So anyway, with that bunch of hogwash out of the way, let's move over to the Britannic.
Actually, let's start by calling her. She was the Britannic when she was commissioned.
Yes.
However, that's not how she started.
No.
Her name was supposed to be the Gigantic.
Yes.
It was the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Gigantic.
Yes.
And because of the Titanic, Britannic truly was gigantic.
Yes, it was. She was bigger in every way.
It started by widening her beam so they could put in a double hull,
Mm-hmm.
which is standard practice on almost every vessel today. Yes, Lord Seth. It was also the Britannic they used for the newsreels because there was no footage of the Titanic. Part of that came back from the fact that
Well, no, that would have to be the Olympic, not the Britannic, because the Britannic wasn't built till several years after the Titanic.
but also the Titanic had some damage that they weren't going to show the rest of the world. You can see it in pictures, but then the Britannic, let's see, what does it say here? Britannic was ordered in 1911, laid down in 1911, launched in February of 1914, and commissioned on the 23rd of December of 1915, and didn't make it a year.
Yes, because actually, the Britannic almost got scrapped before she even left dry dock. The Britannic was put on hold several times, and it wasn't till the drum beats of war that finally got the funds for her to be finished.
And
so World War I was responsible for finally getting her finished. Is also what put her to the bottom of the ocean.
It's also important to remember that the Olympic was a Royal Mail ship, RMS.
Yes.
The Titanic was the RMS Titanic, Royal Mail ship. Britannic never got the RMS designation. It was designated His Majesty's Hospital Ship, HMHS Britannic.
Yes.
So she was a hospital ship, basically from the beginning. That's how they managed to get her built.
Yes. And then actually, it's really funny because she starts out as a hospital ship. Then they decide, we don't need her anymore. So they give her back to the White Star Line. White Star Line starts fitting her back out for passenger service. And then the military goes, you know what? On second thought, we need the Britannic again.
Yep.
So within a year, she went from hospital ship, halfway back to cruise ship, all the way back to hospital ship.
And sank.
And then sank.
Because, she didn't even make it. She wasn't even commissioned a year when she hit the mine in the Adriatic.
Yes. Now, I do want to point that out. She hit the mine and sank. Now, the reason I say that with that emphasis is because Hollywood decided to make a movie called Britannic. In the movie, because it would be more thrilling and better story, the Britannic was sunk by a German submarine. By torpedo. And to this day, even though Ballard has gone down, investigated the damage, and proven that it was a mine, without a shadow of a doubt, it was a mine, there are still idiots in the damn interwebs that will sit there and argue with you that it was torpedoed because they saw it in a movie.
And technically, yes, the Britannic was sunk by a submarine because it was a submarine that was putting the mines out.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it wasn't torpedoed.
Right.
One, the Germans would have been pretty pissed at themselves if they'd done it, because you're technically not allowed to shoot at the hospital ship, but if a mine does it, well, damn.
And let's face it, you cannot mistake a hospital ship. They are
especially
white.
that size.
They are bright white.
Now, there is one more tragedy that happens with the Britannic that didn't happen with the Titanic when she went down. So the Britannic has way more lifeboats. The problem is the ship is listing and the crew somewhat panic. And they start releasing the lifeboats before the bridge, before the captain gives the order to release lifeboats. And they start releasing them. Well, the problem with that is the engines are still running. And the problem with that is the propellers have come above the water.
Yep.
So when the first few lifeboats are lowered into the water, they are immediately sucked into the propellers and people are chopped to bits.
It's also important to keep in mind one of the safety features that they added to the Britannic because of the Titanic disaster was that a lot of the lifeboats, almost all of them, were on motorized davits, not hand davits as the Olympic and the Titanic had. Now, to fit the rest of the lifeboats that they needed on there, they did take the same mechanisms, the hand-cranked davits, and outfitted the Britannic with some of those, but most of everything on there was electrical.
Yes. And like I say, I mean, can you imagine that? You're standing in line, kind of, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. And you look down at the people who went before you in the lifeboat as they get sucked into the propeller blades and chopped to bits. I'm not so sure I want to take the next lifeboat.
And the other problem with that is, let's face it, it was a hospital ship. Yeah. Injured soldiers.
Well, and actually, because it was a hospital ship and because a doctor was a moron, it helped the Britannic sink. A doctor actually helped the Britannic sink. Because for some unknown reason, he had requested and demanded that all the portholes on a certain deck be open at all times. So when the Britannic hit the mine and the water got to that deck level, the water rushed in because every porthole on that deck was open. Because some doctor thought it would be a brilliant idea to get some fresh air in the deck.
The beautiful thing, if there can be such, of the Britannic disaster, and it's not even really a disaster in the terms of like the Titanic.
No.
30 people lost their lives.
Yes.
In the Britannic accident. Which meant they saved 1,036 people.
Yes.
Okay. Again, get back to Nurse Violet Jessup. She was on board the Olympic when it hit the HMS Hawke in 1911. She was on board the Titanic when she sunk. And she was on board the Britannic when she hit the mine. I don't know. If I were her, I would probably never sail again after that.
She was actually a nurse aboard many other vessels after that.
Oh, I understand that.
Although I'm not so sure I'd want her on my vessel, is my problem. You have a habit of ships sinking around you, ma'am. This nasty little habit of a ship sinking around you.
But Eastland Burkholder, safety comes from investigating these disasters, from better safety procedures. Yes, admittedly. Okay. I've personally been on a ship that benefited from the investigation of a disaster. We won't discuss that here, but Navy vessel disasters led to Navy safety standard increase.
Yes.
Okay, same thing with passenger ships. The passenger ships are just getting, at the time they were getting huge. Now they're even bigger.
Oh yeah, the Queen Elizabeth II or the Queen Mary II is an enormous ship.
I've seen the Queen Elizabeth II because we hit
Queen Mary is bigger.
The same. We hit St. Thomas the same time she was there. So
yeah,
it's huge.
Oh yeah, Queen Mary II is bigger.
But it's amazing that disaster leads to better safety.
Yes.
It's unfortunate that there were 2,200 people aboard the Titanic. Nearly 1,500 of them died. There were lifeboats for 1,600.
Yeah.
And 705 people made it. The Britannic, having learned that lesson, I'd be real interested to know how that mine managed to damage more territory than, because the Britannic was designed to float with 5 of her compartments flooded.
Well, what led to, one, it was where the Britannic started to list.
Yes.
Hard. The other problem with that was that deck that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Where all the portholes will open, allowing water to rush into the ship.
Yes. The motto of the agency that investigates airplane crashes is never again, never again. If we can do this, will a plane crash for a reason? Trial and error is still a way for humans to learn. And it's important to remember that when you have something that big, there are a lot of 50-cent parts that can just ruin your day.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Well, and the other thing that we never really mentioned is the Titanic, to give you an idea of how prestige meant everything. We always see Britannic and Olympic with their 4 signature smokestacks. And then you see Carpathia or Lusitania. You see Lusitania especially. Lusitania only had 3.
Yes.
Well, the Titanic had 4 because of the Lusitania.
Right.
Here's the problem. That 4th smokestack was nothing but show.
Oh, yeah.
It was only a 3-stacker, just like the Lusitania. But to make it seem bigger and more important than the Lusitania, they added a 4th smokestack for decoration.
And keep in mind, at the time of the sisters, there were basically 2 big boys on the block when it came to transatlantic cruising. You had the Cunard and you had White Star.
Yes. which later would merge.
I apologize, folks, for Fluff Bucket. Anyway, yes, they would merge, but they would if Cunard builds something,
White Star had to build bigger.
White Star had to build bigger. Cunard decided that they weren't going bigger; they were going faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bird. Robert pointed that out. That we were talking about ships on the 245th birthday of the United States Navy.
Yes. How bad is that the Canadian knew when the United States Navy's birthday was?
Well, I knew it was too. But,
yeah, well, I knew that.
Yeah. It was just that it was a race to be the best.
Yeah. The biggest, the most luxurious, and the best. Because the biggest and the baddest got the most customers.
Right. And if you could charge more to be on the Titanic, they would do it.
Which the blue ribbon allowed you to charge more.
Right. There was no doubt that those three ships were the most majestic cruise liners of their era. But as the Olympic proved, with a 24-year career. Now, Robert and I were talking about this right before we went on the air. The Olympic lasted 24 years, 1911 to 1935.
Yep.
The ship that I served on in the Navy turns 34 in 2 weeks. And she's right at middle age.
Mm-hmm.
Ships are lasting a lot longer, but what did end the Olympic is the fact that there is just a point where you cannot, but there are so many advances that you cannot do anything anymore to the ship.
Well, and not only that, but what did it in the Olympic was money.
Yes.
Cunard and the sailing industry was suffering. And to the point where the two biggest competitors had to combine under government
Order.
funding.
Yeah.
And order, never mind.
Right.
So in order to get government funding, they had to merge. And once they merged, well, the Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mary were being built. And once they were built, a lot of ships that were part of the Cunard and part of the White Star line were sold off for scrap because they were reducing the number of ships.
Right.
Because they were losing money hand over fist at this point.
Hello, Jeff Franklin. And, you know, history is replete with transportation mergers that just didn't go exactly as planned. The Cunard White Star. They merged company-wise, but they tried to play it as if there were still two companies.
Yeah.
And the White Star would build a cruise liner, and when you saw the flags on board the ship, it was the White Star flag above the Cunard flag, vice versa for the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth. They were Cunard liners, and right below them was right below the Cunard flag was the White Star flag.
So, Richard, I'm going to ask you a question as we wrap this up, because poor Richard's been working all night, and now I'm keeping him awake even longer. So I'm gonna wrap this up with kind of a joking question. So in 2022, if we make it through all the rest of this garbage that happens in 2021 and 2020, when the Blue Star Line releases the Titanic 2 that was built in China, you want a ticket?
I prefer my cruises free of charge.
I'm just saying.
I hate to say it this way, but I prefer to be paid to see the world.
Yeah. Although, can you imagine anybody really wanting to line up for that? Like I get it, but don't you want it to at least cross the Atlantic once before you get on board?
But keep in mind that I would have a great deal more faith in the Titanic 2. Not only in hindsight being, 2020 with all the naval disaster,
oh yes,
marine disasters that have happened all over time. But let's face it, ships are getting better.
Yes. Although it does worry me she's being built in China.
Nah. China builds freaking cruise liners that are build cargo ships that carry cargo ships. I mean, come on.
Well, yeah, there's that.
But
yeah. Although I don't know, the Titanic 2 was supposed to be out already.
Yeah, well,
it's been delayed like 18 times.
Well, okay.
The curse of the sisters lives on.
I would rather take a delay than enforce something,
Oh, you mean like they did with the Titanic 1?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I mean, let's face it. History is full of, oh, it's important we do this. It's important we do this. Oh, shit.
Oops.
Okay.
Oh, darn.
And yes, they have learned over time to make things safer. Double and triple hulls on ships.
Mm-hmm.
Lifeboats.
Even lifeboats have evolved.
Yes. Eastland Burkholder, I know you said don't read every one of your comments, but you make a good point. Spacecraft. How much safer did things get after the Challenger disaster?
Oh, yeah, they had to tighten their bootstraps a little bit after that one.
Right. There's nothing like putting the fear of, oh, by the way, you're not allowed to do this anymore, to figure out what you did wrong.
Yes. What could possibly go wrong? Usually we need something to point to get it through people's thick skull.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yes, and the I am glad that the Titanic 2 isn't giving into the crush. Okay? It's not a disaster, but a proof of a crush is any video game nowadays.
Oh, yes.
Okay? The product is more important, or the timing of the product is more important than the product.
Yes.
Okay? Are they taking, is it delaying the Titanic 2? Yeah. Will I take that delay any day of the week?
Yep. Do it right.
Do it right. Make the ship last 50 years. Because they will.
Oh, yeah. But with that, I think what we'll do is we'll let Richard get some sleep here. So with that, I want to thank everyone who came into the chat. Jeff Franklin, Eastland Burkholder, Colin P. Smith,
Jeff
Franklin, Berta Prey 5, Joseph Patrick, Mountains of Elysium, and everyone else and anyone I may have missed. Captain Trek, thank you for coming. Lord Seth, thank you for coming. And please, share the video live stream out. Help us grow. and I hope that we've been somewhat entertaining, a little bit of informative. I've been Robert Knowles.
And I'm Richard Simpson. Thank you, and good night.